welcome back to the Hubscale Podcast, where we dive into the minds of cybersecurity leaders all around the globe. Today, we've got a very special guest with Shareth and the Chief Customer Officer over at Apptega. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me on, James.
Yeah, no problem at all, no problem. But yeah, it'd be good to start off with just a brief introduction of yourself, just so the listeners can have an understanding of your background.
Sure. Shareth Ben, Chief Customer Officer here at a company called Apptega. We focus on GRC automation. I've been a cybersecurity professional for the last 18 years, worked in various areas within cybersecurity, from security operations to managed compliance, IT audit. So my background can be best described as the intersection between cybersecurity, customer success, and customer experience, and working for startups. I've also worked at Big Four and many other larger corporations such as Sun Microsystems and Oracle in the past. So I've got a variety of experience, including consulting, being a practitioner, and then also being primarily a customer-facing professional throughout my career.
Nice, perfect. But yeah, like I say, you've got a very impressive background, so excited to kind of dig into your wisdom later today. But yeah, so just so for the people that might not know, what is the actual role of a chief customer officer?
Yeah, the chief customer officer in most companies typically spans in the responsibility of owning the post-sales customer experience with the emphasis on owning the retention number. So just like how the sales counterpart owns the sales revenue or the booking number, the chief customer officer owns the retention and the expansion number.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Fantastic. But yeah, like I say, you got a very impressive background. I know you took Securonics from about 10 to 100 million, recently joined Apptega about a year and a half ago. But I think it'd be really interesting to kind of dive into your kind of views on customer success. And I think a lot of people find that kind of very useful. So yeah, like I say, let's I think the kind of journey at Securonics could be really interesting to start off with. So like I say, you took them on a really impressive run. What's your kind of view on the defining moments that kind of took from that 10 million to 100 million ARR?
Yeah, it's been a rewarding experience and a lot of lessons learned through the process as well. As you can imagine, working for a startup which is providing enterprise-grade software to Fortune 500 companies, which is mission critical, is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so my experience spans from working with both, large corporations. I'm talking about some of the largest banks, largest airlines, largest oil and gas, largest manufacturers, all the way to mid-market companies as well. Um, I think any startup, especially in cyber, which is constantly evolving and rapidly changing, a company has to go through multiple pivots in order to keep pace with the demands of the industry and the customers to solve problems. And so that's what we did in the span of 8 to 9 years that I was with Securonics. We probably went through at least about four different pivots to make sure that we had product market fit with our customer base. And so that's number one is a company needs to be agile. They have to be constantly learning about what's working, what's not working, who they're serving, what persona they're addressing. And there has to be a feedback loop that changes with the times. And that's what we did, which is very important. And the companies that don't do that will stagnate and may even, fail over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing I would say is, speed of execution is key. You have to be able to make decisions fast, and course correct, depending on what the outcome is. So again, constant learning, constant improvement. However, I would say execution at speed comes at a cost. You end up breaking things along the way. So sometimes you have to realize that you have to slow down in order to speed up. And I think that's where the maturity comes, because if you just keep moving at a pace and you break things, you may miss the mark. And I think mature organizations who know how to run this with in an experienced manner will know when to slow down to speed up, which is what we've done and in the past, and that's really helped us. The third thing I would say is you have to ask the critical questions often because in a startup, there's always dozen different things to do, and not everything is equally important at the same time. So it's uber important that the leadership, asks the critical questions and so that they can prioritize and focus on what's the next most important thing to do. And if you did that, I think over time you'll be by and large successful. But if you fail to do so, then you may just, end up going in so many different directions. I mean, you may not end up getting the output or the outcomes you desire as a team.
Yeah. I completely agree. And one part I think is really key there is obviously you mentioned the different types of pivots that you came in when you're scaling out a function there. But obviously, when you first joined to, let's say, a startup comparing to an organization at 100 million is a completely different aspect culture. But when you kind of went back to the beginning of your time, maybe it's Acronics or potentially similar to your time now at Apptega, what's the kind of first priority you do in customer success when you're at the kind of 1 to 10 million mark in ARR?
So the priority always, changes, but I think at a strategic level, the most important thing to hone for a customer success leader like myself, I would say, is cross-functional collaboration. Because in the end of the day, the job of a customer success team, is to connect the dots between the various functional units within the organization to align them to customer outcomes. And when you do that consistently, the customer starts to realize the value of why they bought the product.
Mhm.
And so honing the cross-functional collaboration skill is key, which means you have to, as a leader, I had to figure out how to work with my peers and align regardless of, their working style, communication styles.
Yeah.
And that's where it can get challenging because, especially in a remote environment, you're not necessarily co-located, especially at the times of the pandemic.
Mhm.
We had to figure out a way to collaborate closely. And so it's continuous communication and tied to the speed of execution. So I would say cross-functional collaboration is key. And I want to highlight one particular strategy that I learned from me being a council member at the Harvard Business Review. They talk about this concept of cultural brokers, which is having, which is aligning the shared interest of these different functional units
Yeah.
and figuring out how to put people in place to bring about the outcomes. And what I mean by that is, let's just say if I have to work closely with engineering, what I did is I used my most technical CSM to be the bridge between CS and engineering to be able to, move some of the rocks
Yeah.
and solve issues. Similarly, when I wanted to make inroads with the sales team, which is a very tenured, enterprise selling sales team, I actually hired a salesperson from the outside to be a part of my team. And then they worked very closely with the sales team because that individual was able to speak their language. So there are some tactics you can deploy, and I highly recommend other secure customer success leaders to adopt this concept of cultural brokers to make these inroads with the other functional units.
Yeah. I completely agree. It's all about you want to make sure you're making the right decisions with your team structure as you continue to scale. You want to make sure you're kind of filling in the gaps there. But is there any other kind of organizational decisions that you look back on that was really game changing from taking you from this place to this place, or is anything else that you potentially could add there?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is when you're in a wartime situation, which I think a lot of companies were a few years back, maybe some are still today, because of the macroeconomic conditions as well as the opportunities and the challenges that came during the pandemic. In a wartime situation, you have to figure out how to mobilize a global team, which is what I had. I had a team of customer success managers. It was spread across 7 different geographical regions, and they all had to work with their sales counterparts. And they were serving, a few hundred different, customers between Fortune 500 as well as mid-market across the globe. And so, in order to make decisions fast, in order to actually change the outcomes, I would say a simple tactic that I adopted is coming up with a whatever strategy I developed, I came up with acronyms to be able to quickly understand what we're talking about. It could be as simple as a get well plan. It's okay, if you have a customer that's at risk, what can we do to align all these functional units? And instead of addressing it piecemeal, how do we collaborate across the board and come up with a cohesive get well plan? And I still remember implementing the strategy overnight. It started to gain a lot of traction. And instead of just, you know, letting things fall apart, we were able to quickly course correct by adopting not just a strategy, but the catchy phrase and acronyms that help mobilize or catalyze the change that we needed.
Yeah, that's quite cool that. But so in terms of, like you say, it seems like you got a lot of traction and success from there. But how would you, as a customer success re leader, sorry, track the success of your CS org? Is there any specific kind of KPIs or other operational frameworks that made you kind of a North Star in that regard?
Yeah, the most important metrics are obviously GRR and ARR, because at the end of the day, those are the holy grail when it comes to SaaS, but obviously there are other metrics as well. My mantra is simple. I would love to see, happy customers, happy employees, and metrics moving the right direction. And in order to do that, you put your consulting hat on, which is what I did, to ask the 5 whys on why gross retention rates are not where it needs to be, or what can we do to improve that. And when you start to drill in, it almost always comes down to three main reasons. Number one is that the customer is not enabled to actually extract value
Yeah,
from the product, and which means it's an enablement challenge that you need to solve for. Or two, the customer is trying to extract value from the product, but the product is fragile. They know there are defects or enhancements or usability is lacking, so they're not able to achieve the outcome. Or the third thing is that the customer it's external. They have challenges. They don't have resources to put on the project or whatever initiative they're running, or they lack the knowledge, frankly, to be able to do what they need to do. And so you have to deploy account management best practices or playbooks to be able to resolve those things. So in most cases, it resulted in these three root causes. And it's also very important as a customer success leader not to solve for the symptoms, but actually solve for the root cause of it. Because if you just keep solving for symptoms,
yeah,
it's going to obviously create burnout and it's not very effective.
yeah, completely agree. But I know the first key point you said are probably the most important, the GRR and NRR. And obviously, the world has evolved a lot throughout the last 10 years with pandemics and who knows what's going on right now anyway. But in terms from your side, anyway, Sharif, what would you say are the biggest contributors in terms of improving GRR and NRR?
The biggest contributors from my past life or present life?
They can be both, yeah.
It can be both. Um, I think it really depends on every organization, but I would say the most common things to do is obviously try to, address the challenges head on with what the customer needs are when it comes to the adoption of the product and resolving any of the defects or challenges, those two main reasons. But I think what gets missed very often is that, we are probably trying to serve customers that are not ideal for us. And this happens more often than not, but it's not very obvious in many cases. So I think this is where a prudent customer success leader will spend time to dig in, and this is something I learned from my past mistakes as well.
Yeah,
Um, we were trying to get a customer who wasn't ideal to renew, and it was never going to happen. And so some of the lessons learned now, what I do is I profile customers who are not really fitting the mark, and I take that feedback back to marketing, and I push left
yeah,
and influence marketing and sales to either change the messaging so we attract the right customers in, or also eliminate or disqualify customers who don't really fit the right mold for what we're trying to solve. So I think those are some important aspects that needs to be given attention to.
Yeah, makes sense. So, what would be, so like you mentioned there, you've had a couple of instances where you've got a customer that you just aren't really fully confident are going to renew, but what would be the kind of early warning signs that you've seen, like I say, that you've learned from that you might be able to miss when perhaps we kind of reduce churn?
Yeah, I think one of the stages of the customer journey that's super vital is to actually obtain the handoff from pre-sales to post-sales. And so in the handoff document, you want to be asking the critical questions, which is some of the drivers and why
Mhm.
the customer bought the product, is that things that they're asking that the product doesn't have, and so on. So I think that's a starting point, I would say, because you want to course correct it early on. I think there's a saying or a stat out there that churn starts during the first 90 days, if at all. And so you want to be able to course correct that. And we've been successfully able to do that because when I come across a handoff document where the customer's asking for stuff that's not in the product at the beginning, which means they have not done a good job evaluating if it's a right fit or not.
Yeah,
And so that's an indicator, early warning sign. Or during the onboarding stage, if they are not fully engaged,
yeah.
obviously that's a challenge as well. So yeah, there are some signs and signals you can pick up very early on that can tell you what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then kind of so kind of going back to your time at Securonics, like you say, is there anything that you would have done differently really in terms of how you scaled the CS function there?
Yeah, there's always things you can do better. And I think this is true for several customer success leaders. We are sort of in the receiving end of what sales and marketing and strategy does. And I think very often what happens is we try to do the best with what we have, but I think it helps to be proactive by
Yeah.
actually shifting left in and trying to influence the types of customers that sales and marketing or strategies is targeting. And I think the key differentiator is that you need to have data
Yeah.
to prove that. To give you an example, in my current role, we were only focusing on solving a particular segment of the market challenge, and when the data showed us that the product has other use cases as well. So I was able to mine on the data, use that as a backup, and be able to influence sales and marketing to be able to change the messaging, change how they bring customers in. But then the key is to have data because
Mhm.
opinion, my opinion versus your opinion, especially in the leadership level, the CEO or the seniority always wins. So it's important for a customer success leader to back up whatever hypothesis or points they have with the data so that they can be more successful in basically coming to the conclusion that they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think you need to have the stats to kind of back it up, don't you? But yeah, so that's kind of one area. But another, so for example, a lot of the kind of listeners today will be people just starting off for a startup, getting into kind of the CCO role, walking into a company at a similar stage that you might have done previously. But what advice would you give to that individual who is going in, for example, at a 1 to 10 million ARR startup for the first time? And yeah, what would be the kind of key features that you might be able to provide for them?
Sure. I think the first thing is you need to ask the critical questions. Like I mentioned, in a startup at that stage, there are dozens of things to do, and there are many ideas that gets thrown around. And it's very easy for a CS leader to be distracted and being focused on the wrong things. So I think it's really important for the CS leader to ask the critical questions. What is really required for us to move the needle? And that has to be aligned with obviously the leadership. Um, and so it could be product market fit, which means spending more time with the customers to get feedback and then work closely with product. Or it could be just retention, right? And which means investing in customer success platforms and programs to be able to proactively, improve retention because, the GRR metric is a lagging indicator and you want to put some effort in to see some early wins, look for those leading indicators. So I think it really is incumbent on the leader to understand what the priorities are from the leadership, and then ask the critical questions and align efforts towards that. I think that's as simple as it can get. Otherwise, the CS leader is going to face a lot of burnout because they're going to be pulled in so many different directions.
Yeah, I love that. I completely agree as well. But cool. But no, like you mentioned before, I think obviously working in cybersecurity, probably on the most evolving kind of landscape in the whole market, shall we say. But with kind of AI advancements and automation tools out there, how do you kind of see the customer success function evolving over the next 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 years?
Sure. I think AI is definitely delivered for customer success today, and I think there's definitely more potential. When I say delivered, what I mean by that is it's making the CSMs more efficient when it comes to the day-to-day operations, such as meeting summarization or synthesizing information across multiple meetings to be able to be more in tune with what the customers are asking for or identifying, certain patterns.
Yeah,
But I think it still needs to deliver on making a CSM strategic.
yeah,
What I mean by that is today, the value prop in AI is still very tactical, and I think there's definitely areas where AI can make a CSM more more strategic with respect to how they approach the accounts. And what I mean by that is that when they're dealing with enterprise customers today, a lot of the work is done based on processing product usage or account management signals. But why not bring in external data
yeah.
with respect to what is happening with the account and the preempt ideas on what they can do and help them take action. So I think a strategic CSM is where AI I think can really make a difference.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And in terms of the kind of mindset or shall we say the skill for the next generation of CS leaders with the new advancements and automation tools, what would you say that the kind of skills and mindsets they will need to have in order to kind of keep up to date with this evolving landscape?
So you're asking what tools
Yeah.
they need?
Or for example, like what kind of mindset would they need as well? Is there anything that you could potentially share or offer?
I think I think there needs to be a shift in mindset, in my opinion, because I think a lot of CSMs who are in the new to the industry or have been here, for a decent amount of time. I think they all talk about, honing relationships, which is very important. They talk about like product, helping the customer adopt the product, which is great.
Yeah.
They talk about actually um, engaging with the customer on an ongoing basis, which is all good, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
I think a what's going to separate out like a high performing CSM from the rest is, again, I would go back to having a more strategic mindset, which is to know that the customer on the other side is just like you.
Mhm.
They have the day-to-day challenges, they have their own problems. And so you need to step out of your comfort zone and just truly understand their background or understand where they're coming from and walk in their shoes and simply asking the question like, hey, how can I get you promoted? What can I do to make you more successful? I think it's also asking the right questions and having a much broader conversation is going to give them the necessary clues or insights into how to strategic.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I think you end up becoming whole. You end up actually not only serving the customer, but you end up building a very strong relationship. Although to do this at scale is challenging. And I think, again, this is where AI can help improve productivity.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And no, I really appreciate the time today. Like I say, I think there's a lot of key kind of cool points that a lot of people will find useful. But just to kind of finally wrap it up, then, if you could go back to a young Sharif starting off in his career, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give him?
Yeah, that's a tough one, James, because I'm still learning and there's a continuous improvement, process of figuring out what to do better. But one thing I would say is I think customer success leader, given this is the profession I'm in, improving the financial literacy is key. I mean, I do have a technical background. My undergrad was in computer science, so that's why cybersecurity is something I'm very fond of because regardless of the technology, I can relate to the customers and the end users. Equally important is building up the financial literacy, and I think that's an area that I would love to have focused on early on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But yeah, it's really a really good talk today, Shareth. Like I say, I think a lot of people gain a lot of value from our conversation today. But excited to see you on this next journey with Apptega, and yeah, it'd be cool to kind of see where you guys end up within the next 3 to 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Enjoy the conversation and the questions.